All right. Hello, everybody. I'm coming to you live from the Great Lakes Data, AI, and Analytics Summit here in Detroit, Michigan. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Donald Farmer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ryan. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you. So, what do you think of the conference so far?
It's really good. Yeah, this has been the third time I've been here, and every time I come, it's a really nice conference. It's not like a huge international conference or anything. There's probably about 300 people, but it's they're people who are very committed to data and analytics, and now to AI, and I really like coming to this region because there's a lot of super interesting businesses here, and they've got a lot of data. They've got a lot of really interesting operational problems and analytic problems to solve. So it's
Uh,
always a great event.
Great. So, for anybody who's not familiar with you and your work, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what it is you do today?
Yeah, that's always a difficult one, like where to start. But I suppose most people who kind of know my work know me from my time at Microsoft. I was there for about 10 years developing products there in the data integration, data mining space, BI space. And I went to Click Technologies. I was there for about 7 years developing ClickSense, which was their sort of second generation product.
Yeah.
And then I left Click and was independent. I've been independent for quite a few years now. And I'm a strategy advisor. I advise enterprises and investors and software vendors on data and analytics and increasingly AI strategy.
What would you say over the course of those years? What were the biggest shifts that occurred? You know, how have things changed the most since you started?
So, one of the key changes that you could sort of call out is the increasing empowerment of the business user. And in fact, it's so much so that when I was at Click, we used to have this catchphrase that, we're seeing the end of the end user. I used to ban my team from using the phrase end user. And my point was that they're now so powerful that they're not at the end of anything. They're actually
Mm.
often the start of the process. They're the heart of the engagement. They're not just at the end of the value chain where IT have created stuff and left it to them. So I think that's actually really important. The business user now is really engaged and empowered, and that really matters. And so no more end users. So that's one big change. And of course, we've seen this very dramatic change towards AI. I think that's very, very significant. But the underlying change, the one that I always like to call out, is that today, as opposed to say 24 years ago, 25 years ago when I was at Microsoft, the fundamental change there that changes everything is we now have better technology at home than we do in the office.
Hmm.
It used to be you went into your office and you had internet, you had fast internet, you
Yeah.
had more powerful computers. Nowadays, we adopt technology ourselves personally long before our business gets around to adopting it. And most people I know are using AI at home. They're using ChatGPT, they're using AI music tools and video tools, they're using all sorts of AI, and their businesses are struggling with how to get started with AI strategy, and they're already way ahead with AI. So this has been a dramatic change. Um, Individual people, people at home are now in a position of power, position of influence, and a position of technology adoption, way ahead of where business is.
What So how does that play out then? People come into their business and this is a fascinating observation, by the way, but I think it's true. They are ahead of their business. So how does that impact the adoption of technology in the workplace?
Well, so there's a kind of model that people have in their mind that technology adoption was primarily something which IT was in control of, and several things happened. First of all, there was a bring your own device, and bring your own device really changed that relationship. IT could no longer be ahead of provisioning; they had to be responsive to what people wanted, and sometimes quite dramatically. There was a fiction, and it really was a fiction that and millennials get blamed for everything, so we might as well blame millennials for it. But millennials were coming into business, and they had their apps, and they had their phones, and they wanted to connect to business systems, and so IT just had to respond to that. And the reason that's a fiction is because millennials coming into business at that time in the 2010s, mid 20 teens, they actually didn't have enough influence. They were coming into junior positions. Nobody was really listening to them. What really changed was executives were getting, in particular, iPads. And they were saying, here is this device that I can use, and it's got Office on it, and it's got all sorts of things on it, and I want this to work with the corporate network. Make it work. And when the CEO gets an iPad for Christmas, in January the 6th, the IT team are working out how to connect it to the system.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I witnessed that. I in fact was that. I'm like the oldest possible millennial. I was that millennial with a phone and no influence,
Right.
who watched the executives bring in their Christmas iPads. Absolutely. So you mentioned, you do advisory work now. You work with enterprises. You work with vendors. Obviously AI is going to be one of them, probably the one of them. But what are the big hot topics right now?
Well, so connected, of course, to AI because it becomes the center of many discussions. There's still a lot of work to be done with data privacy, data governance, issues like that. That's still a huge issue. And in fact, that's one of the major barriers to AI adoption is concern with issues of privacy and governance. So I think that's actually really important. And increasingly, it's not just a question of data governance, it's a question also of analytics governance. If you're only governing the data, then you're only really governing half the process. And this comes down even to legal issues. If you think of the GDPR, or the California data privacy legislation, it's not just about the data; it's about how you use the data. I could give you an internal IT can give you a data set and say, here's a data set of customer information. You can use it for marketing, you can use it for product development, but you can't use it for sales. It's the same data set, but it's got purpose limitations set on it. So it's not enough to govern the data itself. You need to govern the usage of the data, which increasingly means you need to do analytics governance and governance of the analytics artifacts in addition to governing the data itself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's an area where we've seen some interest in good data is because we have all these SDKs and APIs that let you access the analytics. We've had interest from financial institutions and others where they want to be able to audit, hey, what's happening beyond this table? And if I want to apply security to my analytics environment, can I do that quickly in a code-based way that ensures that this field is removed from all visualizations that meet XYZ criteria. That's something I've observed in our customer and prospect base. That's been very interesting, and it's tied exactly to what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's really critical now.
It's not just about the table and what's in it and who can access the table, but what are you going to do with it once you've accessed it?
Exactly so, yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to AI, of course, there's a lot going on. I mean, in the vendor space, every vendor is trying to add LLM-driven features to no matter what part of the data stack you're in, you're trying to add those features. We're adding them too. Everybody's adding them. What do you think of the LLM technology and our current approach to AI, and do you buy the hype?
Well, I buy the hype to an extent because LLMs are very, very exciting, and there's things you can do with LLMs which are frankly astonishing. And so I think the hype in some ways is very justified. I don't necessarily buy the hype in terms of it transforming business. And I think what we have to see is a bit of a sort of a loop developing where the AI will be used in business, but businesses' demands and very specific demands will loop back up and change the AI, so that the AI itself becomes influenced by business demands. Today, the AI is out there almost like a research project, which happens to be useful for a lot of things, but it's not really fulfilling specific business purposes. It's very general purpose. And to give you an example of that, if you, of course, AI is great at writing. And AI is great at doing some things like that. When I say it's great at writing, it's very fluent at writing. What it produces is often pretty dire, but it's very, very. But then again, what we produce as human beings is often pretty dire. But it doesn't necessarily have an ability to dig into questions like strategy, tactics, things like that. It doesn't understand business particularly well. And a really good example of this that I often have to bring to customers is that AI doesn't necessarily understand your business processes. It doesn't understand how invoices are connected to purchase orders, and purchase orders and invoices are connected to shipping details, all that kind of boring stuff. It knows a little bit about it because it's learned it, no doubt, from the books and the training data, but it hasn't actually got that structure in mind. Mm-hmm. And this relates to the way in which, if you look at AI, well, a great example of this, if you get an AI to draw a picture. My favorite one is get an AI to draw a picture of somebody eating noodles with chopsticks. And then, oh, look at the fingers. It's just like it creates these monstrosities of like 8 fingers, chopsticks growing out of the fingernails, all sorts of hideous things. Because it doesn't know how fingers work. It knows kind of what it looks like, but it doesn't understand how it works. And then that's related to the business question because it knows what a good business model looks like, but it doesn't know how a business model works.
Yeah.
And so it's capable of making the same kind of hallucinations. And a hallucination might be acceptable if you're just drawing a picture of somebody eating chopsticks, but it's not acceptable in your tax reporting. It's not acceptable in your data warehouse or in your HR system. So we need AIs which are much more capable of understanding specific business models. We have things like RAG and so on, which are helping. But ultimately, we have to be able to train the AI with very prescriptive business rules rather than just generalized descriptions of how business works and expect the AI to pick it up from there.
Yeah, so that's now we recently partnered together to come up with we have this concept of GoodData we call the analytics lake, and
Right.
we recently partnered with you to produce a white paper, which you can get at gooddata.com if you're interested. The idea behind this being, we really felt that what was needed, both in terms of improving data quality and traditional like data workflows and analytics, and also to provide a foundation for AI, was a place where you could store data, but also alongside the data, the semantic information about that data and the analytics artifacts themselves. And I'm curious, how do you think this concept of the analytics lake fits into this world, and in what way would it be most useful?
Well, those 3 elements that you called out, the data, the semantics, and the analytic artifacts are exactly the reason that analytics lake is I think, a critical component of a modern architecture. And the reason for this is, well, we touched on some of these things. We need to govern the analytics artifacts, not just the data. So if the analytics artifacts are in the lake in a way that they can be governed along with the other systems, then you can apply one set of policies which applies to the data and the analytics artifacts. And that makes it much more feasible to govern all the requirements. But it also means that when the requirements change in one place, they change for the entire system. So it's tremendously valuable that way. And when we talk about the semantics, well, the semantics are exactly that description of how a business operates. The relationship between your invoices and purchase orders and shipping notices, that is semantic. And so being able to capture those semantics is very important. And one of the things when businesses start to innovate in particular is that they innovate with the semantics. I like to say that innovation is semantically messy. And what I mean by that is, real innovation is a different way of thinking about business. It's not just about doing things better, it's about doing things differently. And doing things differently involves changing the semantic relationships between things. And saying, what if we handled purchase orders and invoices differently? And you can see some of that in business, where some of the most innovative businesses actually change their business processes in dramatic ways that can't be captured by traditional systems. And so being able to capture in the analytics lake your data, your semantics, and the objects, the analytic objects which sit on top of that. Now you've got a kind of well-governed, very holistic system, which is agile enough for these innovative changes that modern businesses want to make, but at the same time governed in a rather conservative, with a small c way that regulations and compliance requires of us.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The regulations and compliance. That's another one area where we've seen a lot of interest in this concept is exactly for that reason. The recognition that there's a governance gap, and that we oftentimes in analytics programs, that front end, the thing that people are actually doing with the data is just outside of that realm. It's outside of the governance, and bringing that into it has been a key area of interest for the analytics lake. Great. So, obviously, we're getting into the most dangerous part of the interview, which is prediction time. But I'm curious, what do you think the next few years will look like from kind of in the data world?
Yeah, so there's I think there's three predictions I would like to make. I'm going to hazard three predictions. The first one is that there's going to be some spectacular AI failures. Let's get ready for that. Something's going to go wrong. It's all been fun so far, but we all know if you have kids, it's all fun until something goes wrong, and then it's then the tears start. There will be tears around AI. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be some terrible privacy breach. I don't know if it's going to be I mean, let's hope it's not something genuinely disastrous.
Yeah.
But in business terms, something will happen. There will be failures in AI. That's inevitable. It's happened in every technology cycle. This is going to happen, and people will go cold on it for a while. So that's going to happen. The second thing, however, is that AI is going to become very, very accepted just as a regular part of our business process. Never mind the failure. The failure will happen. It might hold up the acceptance, but it'll just become part of our regular business processes. It'll no longer be a special thing that we do. It'll just be expected that this is part of it. And one of the things that we were chatting about before we started the interview was AI and video editing and how amazing
Yeah.
that seems just now. But I guarantee you, in 2 or 3 years' time, the idea of doing video editing without AI, well, why would you even do that? Why would you even think of doing that? It was ridiculous. You do all that manually. It would be going back to like the old days of splicing tape with razor blades and things like that we used to
Yeah.
do. So, from that point of view, AI, even never mind the fact that there will be failures and there will be some spectacular failures, AI will become absolutely standardized. And then the third thing I'm thinking about is this idea of this progression from being highly centralized IT towards the business user being more and more empowered. Where does that go to next? And I think one of the ways that develops in the future is that, in fact, we'll probably see the model sort of inverted again, and that IT is going to start centralizing some of these functions to ensure that there's more consistency and ensure that there's more centralized compliance and governance. It doesn't mean they'll be taking power away from business users, but I often say that IT has to change its mindset from being the gatekeepers of data to being the shopkeepers of data.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a term I've used a lot, but what I mean by it is that IT are still at the center of the process, but they have changed their mindset. When they do change that mindset, then they have a much more positive role to fulfill. And I'm looking forward to that happening.
Do you think, last question, and thank you so much for the time here today. I mean, do you think when it comes to that process, going from gatekeeper to shopkeeper, do you think the whole conversation we have around kind of data products and product thinking and technology, I mean, do you view that as a path into this mindset, or how do you start thinking of
I
yourself
mean,
that
I,
way?
I absolutely do. And in fact, data products is exactly part of this concept, isn't it? I mean, that's what the shopkeeper does. The shopkeeper has products, and products are fit for purpose, and they're ready for people to consume. So that's something that the shopkeeper does. So I think it's part of that. And yes, people say, oh, but governance, and you just can't have people serving themselves in this environment. But shops are pretty well governed. The shops sell all sorts of highly governed good, alcohol and tobacco and lottery tickets and all sorts of things. And, I live in Washington State where, cannabis is legalized and there's lots of highly regulated shops there in stores. So the shopkeeper is not an unregulated model. It's a model which can be regulated, which can be governed, but it has a very specific consumer focus.
Mm.
And I think when IT get their heads around that and make that switch, we'll see IT stepping back into the spotlight as really being the champions of data and AI rather than being a bottleneck.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to thank you, Donald, for joining us today. What a great talk. If you are interested in checking out Good Data and the Analytics Lake white paper, of course, gooddata.com. Donald, it was a thrill working with you on the white paper. We're absolutely thrilled with how it turned out, and thank you for joining us
It's been a
today.
tremendous pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so final question: where can people find you?
Where can people find me? They could go to treehivestrategy.com. They can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter, or what do we call it now? X.
X, yeah.
I still guess always Twitter. I'm Donald Treehive.
Excellent. All right. Great. Well, thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next time here on the Good Data LinkedIn channel. Bye.